Hey guys, it's Robbie. Let's cut to the chase. Chelsea Wolfe is one of the most stylistically diverse songwriters of the 2010s. Starting out in indie folk, she's branched out into genres such as gothic rock, industrial, and sludge metal, with seemingly every album covering different ground than the one before. In this video, I'll be going over each of her studio albums and covering their respective styles, as well as what I personally like about them. Quick disclaimer, I won't be covering the Unknown Rooms album since that's officially a compilation of unreleased material, rather than a studio LP. I also won't go over the Blood Moon album she did with Converge. As much as I do love that record, it wouldn't make sense to include it as it's just as much a Converged album as a Chelsea Wolfe album. With that out of the way, let's get things started. In 2010, Chelsea released her debut album, The Grime and the Glow. It's fitting that this is the first record she put out because it very much acts as sort of a musical blank slate to add on to. The sound is pretty straightforward indie folk. Many songs are based around only one or two riffs, such as Advice, Advises, Moses, and Widow. Instrumentally, there isn't a great deal of variety here. It's mainly Chelsea singing and playing guitar, sometimes with some sparse percussion in the background. She does use piano a bit on this album, with Benjamin and Gene Wilder being good examples. By the way, I'm using the Spotify track listing here, so I might occasionally mention a song that's not on like the CD or a vinyl version. A good thing about the simple instrumentation on this album is that it really puts Chelsea's voice in center stage. She has a very eerie yet soothing singing voice, and it really does shine. The track Suriname Scapuli is composed entirely of overlaid vocal tracks, and it's just beautiful. One little detail I like about this album is that whenever her voice gets above a certain volume, it gains a bit of overdrive. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it's a cool thing to notice. My favorite songs on this album are Cousins of the Antichrist, Advise Advises, and Half Sleeper. She wasted no time getting her follow-up done, releasing Apocalypsis in 2011. While still heavily influenced by the indie folk sound of her debut, this album is much more fleshed out instrumentally, giving it a sound more akin to gothic rock. This is evident as early as the opening track, Myrrh, which has a very up-tempo drumline that would have sounded totally out of place on The Grime and the Glow. The same is true for the song Demons, which also features a powerful driving guitar riff. The track Tall Bodies makes use of what sounds like a glockenspiel, although it could just be normal keyboards, playing a really peaceful sounding riff that just made me smile when I first heard it. It's worth noting that this is the first album of hers to feature a significant contribution from collaborator Ben Chisholm. He would later become sort of a co-producer on her albums, a role that he continues to this day, although in this album he primarily just plays keyboards. Chelsea's voice once again manages to shine brightly, with many songs using layering effects. My favorite songs on this album are Tracks, Moses, and Pale on Pale. Her next album, Pain is Beauty, came out in 2013. One of the first things I noticed about this album is the increased electronic influence. The opening track, Feral Love, has absolutely pounding electronic drums, which are also used on The Warden, but in that song, they almost make you want to dance. Moreover, House of Metal has a sick industrial synth line interwoven with a xylophone-esque melody and even some digital strings. The synthesizers as a whole play a pretty big part on this album. That's not to say Chelsea Wolfe has switched over into doing primarily electronic music, per se. At this point, she is still primarily a folk musician, but the added influences help flesh the songs out. One example would be on The Waves Have Come. The longest song in her entire discography, at 8.5 minutes, it features some of the most extravagant compositions on the whole record. My favorite songs on this album are Feral Love, House of Metal, and Rains. In 2015, Chelsea released Abyss, and my god, this is quite an album. This is definitely the heaviest and most abrasive album that Chelsea has put out up to this point. The opening track, Carry On Flowers, starts things off with a bang with its pounding electronic drums and crushing industrial bass synths. At certain points on this album, such as on the songs Grey Days and Dragged Out, they'll use an overblown, distorted guitar to produce an almost screaming-like effect. Each album up to this point, while holding true to Chelsea's folk roots, manages to bring different outside influences to the table. The Grime and the Glow was straightforward indie folk, Apocalypsis was more gothic rock influenced, and Pain is Beauty was influenced by electronic music. Abyss seems to have taken primary influence from industrial and noise music. Normally, music this intense would sound out of place with soft vocals, but Chelsea's eerie voice manages to mesh perfectly with the songs, providing a nice contrast. One of the most interesting moments is on After the Fall, which has an electronic breakdown of beeps and boops that reminds me of Kraftwerk a bit. There are still soft moments on this album. The track Maw primarily focuses on Chelsea's singing and clean guitar playing. There's a bit of distortion, but it's not overpowering. Other tracks like Crazy Love, Survive, and Simple Death are also good examples of softer moments on the record. My favorite songs on this album are Carry On Flowers, Maw, and After the Fall. Abyss was followed by 2017's Hiss Spun, which continues the trend of Chelsea making really heavy music. While Abyss drew its heaviness from industrial and synth music, Hiss Spun focuses more on a sludge metal sound. The opener, Spun, has a crushing down-tuned rhythm guitar line that repeats for almost the entire song. The song Vex has a guest vocal appearance from Aaron Turner of ISIS, that's ISIS the band for all you dummies out there, and his growling vocals really do fit the song perfectly. Welt and Particle Flux do bring back some of the industrial synths and darkwave etherealness from Abyss. I know I haven't discussed the lyrics on any of the albums up to this point, but the lyrics on the song 16 Psyche are worth mentioning, I think. Chelsea has mentioned in interviews that she struggled with sleep paralysis as a child, and had to spend quite a few nights at the hospital to undergo sleep studies where she had to sleep in a white room while hooked up to monitors. This is referred to with lyrics like, "I've spent in different beds many moons, and that's the way I prefer it," on the track 16 Psyche. This is also referenced in the album artwork as well as the music video for the song, which I'll link up in the corner. As is the case with Abyss, there are still softer moments on this album. Two Spirits brings back some of the folk sounds from earlier albums and has some truly insane high notes from Chelsea. And Offering has ethereal background synths and what sounds like a string section. My favorite songs on this album are 16 Psyche, The Culling, and Twin Fawn. Chelsea's most recent album, Birth of Violence, was released in 2019. I said earlier that each Chelsea Wolfe album had different influences than the one that came before it. Birth of Violence doesn't follow this trend, instead going back to the indie folk sound of her debut. Instrumentally speaking, the album is very bare bones, focusing primarily on Chelsea's singing and acoustic guitar playing. There's still good examples of other instruments being used. The opening track, The Mother Road, has nice, gentle drumming throughout the song, and there are strings that kick in right before the end. Speaking of drums, American Darkness and Dirt Universe utilize soft, brush-stroked drums, with the former also having subtle keyboards and soft, swelling synth pads, which are both also featured on Preface to a Dream Play. Deranged for Rock and Roll has some distorted guitar volume swells, one of the few examples of non-acoustic guitar on the album. The simplistic instrumentation really does allow Chelsea's voice to shine. For example, the title track has some truly insane high notes. This album might initially seem like a jarring change from what she had done up to this point. It's really worth listening to. My favorite songs on this album are The Mother Road, Be All Things, and Birth of Violence. So there you have it. Chelsea Wolfe's discography is one that truly has something for everyone, whether you're into folk, rock, or metal. Hopefully this video will encourage you to check out at least one of her albums. While I didn't cover them, I'd also encourage you to check out the Unknown Runes compilation, as well as the Blood Moon collaboration with Converge, since they're both definitely worth listening to. If you're still watching at this point, I just want to say thank you much for giving me your time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit thumbs up and click subscribe. I upload videos whenever I can. Thanks for watching. I will see you when I see you next.